Hello students, today we are going to learn about spectroscopy in physical chemistry. This is paper 8 of the EPG Pathshala, and this paper deals with spectroscopy as a part of physical chemistry. You learn about spectroscopy in various papers in undergraduate, postgraduate level, in inorganic chemistry, in organic chemistry, and in physical chemistry. The physical chemistry part of spectroscopy deals with the basic principles. So I'll just briefly read out the syllabus so that you know that what is going to come in the remaining modules. The first part is the unifying principles. Here we talk about the basic principles of spectroscopy, things that you might have learned in physics or somewhere in chemistry, but we'll just recapitulate all that. These are the unifying principles, and this is going to be around 6 hours. We'll talk about the nature of electromagnetic radiation, and you know that it has wave and particle character. We'll talk about polarization, because all these parts are going to come in the remaining modules. We'll talk about the regions of electromagnetic radiation and the types of quantized energy levels that are probed in those regions. We'll talk about the Planck's distribution law, as you know that this is the fundamental law. We'll talk about the Boltzmann population distribution, because this is also a very important part of spectroscopy, which tells you about the intensities of various lines. Then we'll talk about the main part of spectroscopy, that is the interaction of electromagnetic radiation with matter. What all happens? Induced absorption and emission, spontaneous emission, Einstein's coefficients, and the relationship between them. These are some new topics that you'll learn about, but they'll tell you a lot about spectroscopy. We'll also learn about some part of quantum mechanics, because as you know in physical chemistry, we are dealing with the quantum aspects of radiation. We'll talk about conjugate variables and the Heisenberg uncertainty principle and line broadening that results from there. We'll talk about transition probabilities and transition dipole moments, and we'll have an overview of the selection rules, which are very important in spectroscopy. The first kind of spectroscopy that we'll learn about is atomic spectroscopy, and this is going to be a 3-hour module. Here we'll learn about the Bohr's theory and spectra of hydrogen and hydrogen-like ions and the alkali metal spectra. As you know, the beginning of spectroscopy resulted from the Bohr's theory, because he observed the spectra of hydrogen, which he was able to explain with his own theory. Then we have the anti-symmetry principle and the spin selection rule. You'll see that quantum mechanics has a large role to play in spectroscopy. We'll learn about spin-orbit coupling, Russell-Saunders coupling scheme, and term symbols that result from there. We'll learn about the Hund's rules and JJ coupling and the Zeeman effect. And then we'll learn, because we'll learn photoelectron spectroscopy in different places. Here we'll talk about photoelectron spectroscopy of atoms. We'll talk about the principles, the orbital ionization energies, Koopman's theorem, and the effect of degeneracy. Then the next topic is molecular spectroscopy, and in this the first topic is microwave spectroscopy, which is going to be a 5-hour module. Here we'll learn about the overview of molecular spectra, what are the differences between atomic spectra and molecular spectra, the Born-Oppenheimer approximation, and how it governs the rotational, vibrational, and electronic energy levels, how it helps us to study all these levels separately. The rigid diatomic molecule, this is something that you have learnt about in quantum mechanics, but now we'll see what are the consequences of this, how the interaction of radiation with a rotating molecule. You already learnt about the rotational energy levels. We'll learn about the selection rules, how populations govern the shape of spectral lines and their intensities, the rotational spectra and bond lengths of diatomic molecules, how they are calculated, and then we'll learn about the effect of isotopic substitution, centrifugal distortion, how it affects the rotational spectra. Then we'll come to rotation of polyatomic molecules, how we classify the molecules according to their shapes, quantization of energy, and spectra. Then we'll also learn about the Stark effect, which is the effect of electric fields on the spectra. The next topic that we learn about is vibrational spectroscopy. Here we'll talk about introduction to vibrational spectroscopy, review of the linear harmonic oscillator that you've learnt about in quantum mechanics, normal coordinates and linear transformations, which is the classical theory, concept of normal modes, assignment of normal modes to irreducible representations. So you will be applying group theory as well as quantum mechanics to understand the vibrational spectroscopy. Then the result of the quantum mechanical treatment, allowed energy levels, 0-point energy, force constants and bond strengths, mechanism of infrared radiation absorption. This will tell you what kind of spectra we obtain, the selection rules for harmonic oscillator and comparison with experimental spectra. Then we'll also discuss the potential energy function for a chemical bond. We'll talk about the ideal harmonic oscillator and how real molecules differ from that, and harmonicity, Morse potential energy diagram, and the modification of selection rules. Overtones and hot bands and dissociation energies and how they are calculated, all this will be dealt in these modules. Then we'll also talk about breakdown of the Born-Oppenheimer approximation, and which results in the rotational spectroscopy also being observed in vibrational when a vibrational transition takes place. Then selection rules for rotational vibrational transitions and what we mean by P, Q and R branches. Then again we'll go to group theory, we'll talk about normal modes and irreducible representations for polyatomic molecules. The next topic is Raman spectroscopy, and this is a 2-hour module. We'll talk about Rayleigh and Raman scattering, Stokes and anti-Stokes lines, vibrational Raman spectroscopy, polarizability ellipsoid, selection rules, mutual exclusion principle, polarization of Raman lines, and determination of Raman activity of vibrations from character tables. Then we'll also discuss rotational Raman spectroscopy. Finally, we'll talk about electronic spectroscopy of molecules. Now this is a very large portion of the syllabus and it's of 7 hours. We'll talk about diatomic molecules, what are the selection rules for diatomic molecules, what are spin selection rules, orbital and vibrational selection rules, the term symbols, Frank-Condon factor, and vibronic transitions, dissociation energies and pre-dissociation. And we'll talk about photoelectron spectroscopy now of diatomic molecules. We'll take the example of nitrogen. Then we'll study polyatomic molecules and how we talk about integrated absorption coefficients, oscillator strengths, and types of transitions and solvent effects on transitions. Again, we'll apply a little bit of quantum mechanics to understand electronic spectra, and we'll study the free electron model and the HMO theory and apply it to the electronic spectra of some representative molecules. And then we'll apply HMO theory to cis and trans butadiene and ethylene, and we'll discuss n-pi star and pi-pi star transitions of formaldehyde. Then we'll discuss what are the excited states, how they come back to the ground state by internal and external conversion, fluorescence, intersystem crossing, phosphorescence, kinetics and rate constants, and the Stern-Bolmer equation. And you'll see that all this you study in organic and inorganic spectroscopy also, but you do not learn about the fundamentals. These will be dealt with in this particular module. And then the final topic that we are going to discuss is NMR spectroscopy, nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy, and this is of 3 hours. We'll discuss what are nuclear spins, interaction with a magnetic field, Larmor frequency, shielding, mechanisms of relaxation, spin lattice and spin, quantum mechanical treatment of 2-spin systems. Study matter using spectroscopy as a tool. Understanding of radiation is necessary, as spectroscopy is all about the interaction of matter with radiation. The definition of spectroscopy is the study of interaction of radiation with matter. So before you start any study of spectroscopy, you have to understand both. And after studying this module, you should be able to learn about the nature and properties of electromagnetic waves. You will be introduced to the classical picture of light and electromagnetic waves. Later, its spectrum and briefly the kinds of spectroscopy observed in each region of the electromagnetic spectrum will be discussed. So coming to the introduction, as I have already said, spectroscopy is the study of the interaction of radiation with matter. It is central to all the sciences, be it chemistry, physics, astrophysics, life sciences, geology, or any other science. Spectroscopy is all about the colors that you see, the rainbows, everything. Its study is therefore important because it allows us to have a peek at the internal structure of atoms and molecules. As you know, atoms and molecules are very, very small. But using spectroscopy, you will learn a lot about these atoms and molecules. Through spectroscopy, you should be able to understand the internal structures of the atoms and molecules. Though spectroscopy does not directly show you the molecule, it reveals a lot about its structure. That is, it provides its image, as it were. You could draw a molecule by just looking at its spectroscopic constants. So the word spectroscopy, in fact, is derived from the Latin word spectron. Spectre, you know, means a ghost or a spirit. Obviously, not one kind of spectroscopy will give you all the information. You will need different kinds of spectroscopy, and we will be studying the various kinds of spectroscopy in this paper and see how all of them together will give you a picture of the molecule. Besides the determination of molecular structure, spectroscopy is used for the identification of unknown molecules. Unknown molecules about which we don't even know what their structure is. Using spectroscopy, you can learn about them. Something like the transition states, something like the intermediates, which are difficult to isolate, but using spectroscopy, you'll be able to study them, get some idea about the structures. You can detect known molecules, find out whether they are present in the atmosphere, for example, and measurement of concentrations for analytical purposes. If you know that a molecule is present, how much of it is present, that also spectroscopy will tell you about. And as you know that historically, spectroscopy originated through the study of visible light dispersed according to its wavelength. For example, by a prism, you know that Newton's experiments, that using a prism, he was able to split white light into 7 components. Electromagnetic radiation is the source of radiated energy used in spectroscopic investigations. There are other kinds of radiation. For example, the alpha and beta particles that you learn about in radioactivity, these are emitted by radioactive nuclei, and also the solar neutrinos which are bombarding the earth every day. These are not electromagnetic in nature, so they do not interest us in spectroscopy. But gamma rays, which are also emitted by some nuclei, these are electromagnetic radiation. We are not concerned with this high energy radiation, and these are very high energy radiation, and these are next only to the highest energy cosmic rays. The electromagnetic spectrum encompasses a wide range of energies, of which visible radiation is only a small part. We are all familiar with visible radiation all the time, but we must recognize that the electromagnetic spectrum is huge. It has many other parts which are not even part of visible region. Light is also described as a wave. There are 2 ways of describing light, as you know. It behaves like a wave, it also behaves like a particle. We'll first talk about the wave nature of light and how do we define a wave. A wave is defined as a disturbance which travels and spreads out through some medium. We are all familiar with ripples in a pond and ocean waves. When you throw a cork in the water, in a pond, what will you observe? You will find that the waves are going outwards, but the cork remains in the same place. It is only going up and down at the same place. This means that the water is not moving outwards. Indeed, if it were to do so, all the water would end up at the banks of the ocean. Because the water is not moving, it is only moving up and down. It only moves up and down normal to the direction of propagation of the wave. Such waves are called transverse waves, and light waves are also transverse waves. The other kind of waves are longitudinal waves, and in which the motion is parallel to the direction of motion. There it was perpendicular to the direction of motion in transverse waves. In longitudinal waves, it is parallel to the direction of motion. And examples of longitudinal waves are sound waves, and such waves require a medium for their propagation. They cannot travel through vacuum. These are also known as mechanical waves because they need a medium. Transverse waves can travel in vacuum. In space, no one can hear you scream because sound waves are not transverse waves, but they can see you. So you understand why they can see you, because to see you need light waves which are transverse, but To hear you scream, you need longitudinal waves, and obviously you cannot hear anyone. Now let us look at the characteristic properties of waves. Now this is a transverse wave that we are talking about. It is moving to the right. The water molecules move only up and down. The high points in the wave are called crests and the low points are called troughs. The distance between two consecutive peaks, that is two peaks which are next to each other, or troughs as they are, which are at the bottom in a wave, is called the wavelength, and the symbol that is usually given is lambda, the Greek letter lambda. The height of the crest is called the amplitude of the wave and is usually given the symbol capital A. Therefore, the height of the water molecules y varies periodically between -a and +a through 0. Such a wave can be conveniently described as a sine function, since at the starting point of the wave the height is 0 and sine 0 is also 0. We can thus write y at 0 is equal to a sine 0, or y at a time t is equal to a sine theta at the time t, and theta is expressed in radian. Now we can trace yt by imagining an object moving counterclockwise or anti-clockwise on the circumference of a circle of radius a. When the object has traversed 2 pi radians, it has completed a full circle and or a cycle, and this is shown in figure. If we can express the angular frequency as omega radians per second, as you know, angular frequencies are expressed in as omega, then theta t is given by omega t. So we can equivalently write yt is equal to a sine omega t. So this is how we have shown, and this is moving on the radius of a circle of amplitude a. Radius is equal to the amplitude. It is moving counterclockwise. When it is horizontal, then theta is equal to 0, and you have y is equal to a into sine 0, which is equal to 0. And as it moves, sine keeps on increasing until at 90 degrees, what happens that it reaches its maximum value, and which is equal to the amplitude, and then it starts decreasing again, because in the second quadrant sine is decreasing until it becomes 0 again, and then it becomes negative, and then again it comes back to 0, and this cycle is repeated as the object keeps on moving. The time taken for a complete cycle is called the time period of the wave, and it is denoted by a capital T. A more important quantity than the time period is the frequency, that is how many cycles are taking place in a given time, and this is defined as the number of waves or cycles per second that pass a given point in space, and this is symbolized by nu. Evidently the two quantities are related as nu is equal to 1 by t, and as we shall soon see, the energy of a radiation is directly proportional to its frequency. You know about Planck's law, but we will talk about it a little later. Also, since a cycle is complete when theta changes by 2 pi, the number of cycles per second, the frequency, is given by nu is equal to omega by 2 pi. We therefore write, this is an alternate way of writing y as a function of t is equal to a sine 2 pi nu t. Coming next to the speed of light, the distance traversed in a cycle is lambda. We've seen that. The speed v of the wave is the distance traveled in a cycle divided by the time taken to complete a cycle. That is lambda by capital T, or lambda nu. For light, the speed is given its own symbol c. It's a very special symbol, since all electromagnetic radiation has the same speed, that is 3 into 10 raised to the power of 8 meter per second. This is approximately 3, it is 2.9978, a huge number. It takes 1.33 seconds for light to travel from the earth to the moon. You can imagine, so it is so fast, and 8.33 minutes for it to travel from the sun to the earth. Einstein showed that according to special relativity, nothing can exceed the speed of light. Even at this speed, the nearest star, Alpha Centauri, is 9 years round trip away. So even with such a speed, you will not be able to reach there in less than 9 years. We may thus write c is equal to lambda nu, a relation that allows us to interconvert between the wavelength in which all spectroscopic measurements are made and the frequency to which the energy is proportional. So you get an idea about the energy from the wavelength. Thus shorter, this is a very important thing, shorter wavelengths correspond to higher frequency because the product of the wavelength and the frequency is a constant, and larger energies, they also correspond to larger energies, and longer wavelengths to smaller energies. We also know that light travels in a straight line. Though the speed of light is constant in vacuum, it depends on the refractive index of the medium of propagation. Another way of writing yt is in terms of c, and this is y as a function of t is equal to a sine 2 pi ct by lambda. Light waves are travelling waves, and for these waves we can write down y as a function of t is equal to a sine omega t minus 2 pi ct by lambda, and it can also be written as a sine omega t minus kz by putting k is equal to 2 pi by lambda and z is equal to ct for the distance travelled by a wave travelling in the z direction. So these are different ways of expressing y as a function of t in terms of the velocity of light, in terms of the wavelength, in terms of the distance travelled, and in terms of the wavelength. Now coming to the classical description of the electromagnetic radiation, we'll first give a brief introduction. Up till now, we have not defined the quantity yt for light waves. What are we talking about? We are talking about a wave where we are showing y as the y-axis, and we've shown that it is a function of t. But what is the meaning of this y? It was first told by James Clerk Maxwell, and he realized that more than a century ago, that connection between optics and electricity and magnetism, and this is through his famous 4 equations which govern all electromagnetic radiation. Although I don't want to go into too much of mathematics, but it is imperative that we understand these 4 equations so that we recognize what radiation is. According to Maxwell's relations, there are oscillating magnetic, and that is B, a vector, and electric E, which is again a vector, fields perpendicular to the direction of propagation of the wave. That is, if a wave is travelling in a particular direction, there are perpendicular to it a magnetic field and an electric field. That means that the y as a function of t and the other equations that we have introduced up till now, it could refer to either the sinusoidally oscillating electric or the magnetic field. These two fields, E and B, they are in phase. That is, they reach their maximum and minimum values at the same instant of time. The electric field oscillates in the xz plane and the magnetic field oscillates in the yz plane. Now this corresponds to a polarized wave where you have electric fields in a particular direction and the magnetic fields in a direction perpendicular to it, and all the electric fields are in a particular direction, all the magnetic fields are in a particular direction. Conventionally, the plane in which the electric field oscillates is defined as the plane of polarization. When you have a polarized wave, its plane is given as the plane of the electric field and not the magnetic field. So in this case, it turns out that this is the xz plane. Now figure shows a harmonic plane wave propagating in the z direction. Note that E, the vector E, the vector B, and the direction of propagation, that is k, form a right-handed triad. These are Maxwell's equations are based on this. So here in figure it is a sketch of the electric field and magnetic field vectors of a light wave. Coming to Maxwell's equations, Maxwell postulated the theoretical model of light as electromagnetic waves during the time in history when the wave and particle pictures of light were still dueling. At that time, it was not clear whether light behaves like a wave or as a particle. At that time, when people were unaware of all this, Maxwell managed to postulate the theoretical model, and let us see how Maxwell's equations can be manipulated to give classical wave equations for the space and time dependence of the electric and magnetic field. Maxwell's equations, I'll just briefly read out the Maxwell's equations for vacuum in SI units, and these are the vector del dot E is equal to 0, del dot B is also equal to 0, and del into E, cross product E is equal to minus del B by del T, and del cross B is equal to epsilon 0 mu 0 del E by del T, and here mu 0 is equal to 4 pi into 10 raised power of minus 7 Newton second square Coulomb raised to the power of minus 2, and this is the permeability of free space, and epsilon 0 is equal to, these are fundamental constants, it is equal to 8.85 into 10 raised power of minus 12 Coulomb square per Newton meter inverse square, and this is the permittivity of free space. These last two equations couple the electric and magnetic fields. You see that they depend upon both the electric and the magnetic fields. Equation this implies that del cross E is equal to minus dB by dt. That means that the cross product of del by E is related to the magnetic field. And similarly, the next equation also tells us the same thing. And 6e also implies that if B is time dependent, del into E is non-zero, that is E is a function of the position. Further, if del B by del T itself changes with time, so does del into E. In such a case, E also varies with time, since the operator, del operator, cannot cause time variation. Thus, in general, a time varying magnetic field gives rise to an electric field which varies both in space and time. It will be seen that these coupled fields propagate in space. The electric field makes the magnetic field, and the magnetic field, when it propagates, it creates the electric field. So they are both dependent on each other. Maxwell was the first one to recognize that. We will first examine whether the equations lead to transverse waves. For simplicity, let us assume that the electric field has only the x component and the magnetic field only the y component. Note that we are only making an assumption regarding their directions. The fields could still depend on all the space coordinates x, y, z in addition to time t. Now we have Gauss's law, which states that del dot E is equal to del Ex by del x plus del Ey by dy plus del Ez by del z is equal to 0, the partial derivatives. Since only Ex not equal to 0 because we don't have any other component, this implies that delta Ey by dy is equal to 0 and delta Ez also similarly is equal to 0. Thus, Ex is independent of the x coordinate and can be written as Ez is a function of y, z and t. A similar analysis shows that By is independent of the y coordinate and can be written explicitly as By, xz and t. So By is a function of x, z and t, and Ex is a function of y, z and t. Consider now the time dependent equation. The curl equation for del By by del x minus del Bx by del y is equal to del Ez by del t, which is equal to 0. Since By is equal to 0, this gives del By by del x is equal to 0, showing that By is independent of x and hence depends only on z and t. In a similar manner, we can show that Ex also depends only on z and t. Thus, the fields E and B do not vary in the plane containing them. Their only variation takes place along the x-axis, which is perpendicular both to E and B. The direction of propagation is thus the z direction. And this we have shown in this figure. To see that the propagation is really a wave disturbance, take the y component of equation 6c and the x component of equation 6t, and we have the partial derivative of Ex with respect to x is equal to minus of the partial derivative of By with respect to t, and minus del By by del z is equal to mu 0 epsilon 0 del Ez by del t. To get the wave equation for Ex, the x component of E, take the derivative of equation with respect to z and substitute in equation and interchange the space and time derivatives, which gives us this equation. The second partial derivative of Ex with respect to z square del 2 Ex by del z square is equal to mu naught epsilon naught minus del 2 By by del z del t, and this is equal to minus del by del t del by by del z, and this is equal to mu 0 epsilon 0 second derivative partial derivative del 2 Ex by del t square. Similarly, we can show that del 2 By in a similar way. Del 2 By by del z square is equal to mu naught epsilon naught del 2 del square By by del t square. Each of the above equations represents a wave disturbance propagating in the z direction with a speed which is equal to c is equal to 1 by square root of mu naught epsilon naught. So, very elegantly we have been able to derive c in terms of these fundamental constants. On substituting the numerical values which we have already given for mu naught and epsilon naught, we find that the speed of electromagnetic radiation waves in vacuum, it turns out to be 2.99792 into 10 raised power of 8 meters per second, which is approximately, which can be taken as 3 into 10 raised power of 8 meters per second. Now consider plane harmonic waves of angular frequency omega, and the wavelength then is equal to lambda is equal to 2 pi by k. Remember what k is. We can express the waves as Ex, the x component of E is equal to E naught sin kz minus omega t, and similarly the y component of B, By is equal to B naught sin kz minus omega t. The amplitudes E naught and B naught, that is for the electric field and the magnetic field, these are not independent of each other because they must satisfy the equation, that is the partial derivative of del Ex by dz is equal to E naught k cos kz minus omega t, and del By by del z similarly is equal to minus B naught omega cos kz minus omega t. So, using the first equation we get E naught k is equal to B naught omega, and you see that the electric field amplitude and the magnetic field amplitude, they are now related to each other. The ratio of the electric field amplitude to the magnetic field amplitude is given by E naught by B naught is equal to omega by k is equal to c. Now, there was a purpose for deriving this. The reason was that I wanted to show that E naught, the amplitude, is c times B naught. That means that the amplitude of the magnetic field is much smaller because c is a very large constant compared to the electric field amplitude. So, here I have given an example. You determine the state of polarization and the direction of propagation of wave if the electric field is of a plane electromagnetic wave in vacuum is given by E naught Ey is equal to 0.5 cos 2 pi into 10 raised power of 8 t minus x by c in volts per meter, and Ex is equal to Ez is equal to 0. So, also determine the magnetic field. We have learned that we can learn about the magnetic field amplitude very simply if we know the electric field amplitude. Now, comparing with the standard form for a harmonic wave, omega turns out to be 2 pi into 10 raised power of 8 radian per second, and k turns out to be 2 pi into 10 raised power of 8 per by c. So that lambda is equal to c by 10 raised power of 8, that means it is equal to 3 meter if we substitute c is equal to 3 into 10 raised power of 8 meters per second, and the direction of propagation is the x direction. Since the electric field oscillates in the xy plane, and this turns out to be the plane of polarization. Remember, we said that the plane of polarization is the plane of the electric field. Since B must be perpendicular to both the electric field direction and the direction of propagation, that means that the magnetic field B has only Z component and with an amplitude equal to B naught, which is equal to E naught by C. And we had just derived this equation, and this turns out to be 1.66 into 10 raised power of minus 9 Tesla. The electric field is given in volts and the magnetic field in a unit called Tesla. Thus, Bz is equal to 1.66 into 10 raised power of minus 9 cos 2 pi into 10 raised power of 8 t minus x by c into t. Now, Maxwell's relations could explain most phenomena involving light which were known at that time. The law of reflection What is that? It says that the angle of incidence is equal to the angle of reflection. The law of refraction, that means a light beam is bent towards the normal when passing into a medium of higher refractive index, and it is bent away from the normal when passing into a medium of lower index of refraction. And what is the index of refraction? It is the speed of light in vacuum divided by the speed of light in a particular medium. The inverse square law, the light intensity diminishes with the square of distance from the source. So Maxwell's relations, they could provide explanation for all of light's interesting properties, such as diffraction, which explain rainbows, and reflection. In mirrors, you see it is reflection that shows you your image, and light was firmly established as a wave. Now the third property that we have talked about, it implies that the speed of light varies with the refractive index of the medium. So, and only its speed in vacuum can be considered a fundamental constant. So speed in any other medium is not a fundamental constant. We only have C naught. That is why it is usually also written as C naught in vacuum. The frequency remains constant in any medium and is thus a more fundamental property. So if the speed of light is changing, either the frequency must change or the wavelength. It turns out that the frequency is a fundamental property that doesn't change. The wavelength changes when light moves from one medium to another. This means that the wavelength changes on changing the medium of propagation. Maxwell's relations show that the electric and magnetic fields recreate each other as the wave propagates. Thus, the oscillating electric fields create magnetism, and as in an electromagnet, as we all know, and similarly, the oscillating magnetic field creates electricity as in electric generators. These properties have been used for these generators and for electromagnets, and this goes on until the electromagnetic wave meets an object. Now, this is where spectroscopy comes into the picture. What happens when electromagnetic radiation meets an object? But before that, let us see how the electromagnetic spectrum is divided into different regions. Now you are all familiar with visible light, and we see that it has 7 major colors, from short wavelengths, high frequency, which is violet, to long wavelengths, which is low energy and low frequency, and this is the red. So we have 7 colors of the rainbow: violet, indigo, blue, green, yellow, orange, red are familiar, VIBGYOR, the colors of the rainbow. Our eyes recognize nu or lambda as color. So our eyes are able to differentiate between different colors because our eyes are able to make out the value of the frequency. Till the 18th century, people were aware of the different colors of the rainbow because all these things are visible. Everybody knew about visible light. But at the beginning of the 19th century, it became apparent that there is radiation beyond the visible, and the electromagnetic spectrum is not restricted to the visible region, and it encompasses a wide range of frequencies. The continuous range of frequencies is known as the electromagnetic spectrum. The entire range of the spectrum is often subdivided into specific regions, and this is generally because of spectroscopy. Different kinds of spectroscopy is studied in different regions. The subdivision of the entire spectrum into smaller regions is done mostly on the basis of how each region of electromagnetic waves interacts with matter. In the various kinds of spectroscopy, depending upon the region of the electromagnetic spectrum that we are scanning, different kinds of energy changes occur. Now, almost one of the smallest energy regions is the microwave region, and it is just sufficient to change the rotational energy of the molecules. And in the next higher energy range, the infrared region, another degree of freedom, the vibrational motion is also affected. Similarly, electronic energy changes occur in a still higher energy region, that is the ultraviolet and the visible regions. Other kinds of spectroscopy are classified according to the techniques adopted for their study. For example, the resonance techniques, these are different from the normal spectroscopy techniques. The electron spin resonance and nuclear spin resonance techniques involve smaller energy changes and are studied in the microwave and radio frequency regions respectively. ESR in microwave and NMR in radio frequency region, which is an extremely small region, smaller than microwave. Photoelectron spectroscopy involves very high energy photons, and Raman spectroscopy deals with scattering, where you can use high energy laser beams, visible or UV radiation. You can use any one of them. Now, these we have shown in the figure. These are the different regions of the electromagnetic region. Starts with the cosmic rays, which have the highest energy. Then you go to the gamma rays, and then there are the ultraviolet rays, then the visible region, then you have the infrared region, the microwave region, and you have the radio frequency region. And this visible region also is divided into different colors of the rainbow, violet to red. Violet is the high energy region, high frequency region, and red is the lowest energy. Infrared is smaller than red, and that is why it has lower energy than lower frequency and lower energy than the visible radiation. And ultraviolet is higher than violet, and that is why it has higher energy than the visible region. We can see that the wavelength has dimension of length, because if you remember, we had shown what a wave is, and it is the distance between two crests, so it has the dimensions of length. And you can express it in various units, and the unit that you use depends upon what region of the electromagnetic spectrum you are talking about, because you don't want to deal with very large numbers or very high powers of 10. So in the visible region, we use nanometer. It used to be angstrom before, but now in SI units we use nanometer, and that means 400 nanometer. Notice that the wavelength is smaller, but the energy is higher for violet, and 700 nanometer is for the red, and its wavelength is higher. That means its energy is lower, because the frequency is also lower. White light is a mixture of the 7 colors of the rainbow, as was shown by Newton. No object has its own color. When white light strikes the object, it may absorb a particular color from the white light depending upon its energy levels and reflect the remaining color. What your eye sees is the reflected color, which is the complementary color to the absorbed color. So one has to be very clear. If it is reflecting blue, that means that it has absorbed the complementary color to blue. And from that we can get to know what are the energy levels involved in the molecule. Why is it absorbing that particular color? I'll briefly summarize the variables and units that are used in spectroscopy. Now the wavelength units we've already seen is length, where we variously use nanometer, which is abbreviated as nm, and 1 nanometer is equal to 10 raised to the power of -9 meter. We also use micrometer sometimes, and 1 mu micro means 10 raised to the power of -6. The frequency units are cycles per second, that is 1 by second or second inverse, and it is given the name Hertz. And after the physicist Heinrich Hertz, who discovered radio waves in 1887, 22 years after Maxwell's equations. Now we need to keep the numbers manageable, so we use certain prefixes. Kilo, if it is very large, we use kilohertz, that is 10 raised to the power of 3 hertz, so that we have manageable numbers. Mega, in case it is still larger, mega is 10 raised to the power of 6, so it is 10 raised to the power of 6 hertz, and giga is 10 raised to the power of 9. So depending upon, for example, the microwave region, we will be talking about gigahertz and so on. Then we have another quantity that I have not talked about till now, and this is also very often used, and this is called the wave number. It is particularly used in the infrared and UV visible spectroscopy because it gives convenient numbers. It is defined as a count of the number of wave crests or troughs in a given unit of length, symbolized by a nu with a wavy cap over it. It has the dimensions of inverse length and is given by nu by c is equal to 1 by lambda. If lambda is a wavelength, the number of waves in a particular unit will be 1 by lambda, and since lambda is related with the frequency as lambda into nu is equal to c, we can alternatively express it as nu by c. But usually we use centimeter inverse. Lambda is generally expressed in centimeter for getting the wave number. Reason being that it is a very convenient unit and it has been used for a long time. It is not an SI unit, but it still remains the preferred unit. And if you look at different spectrophotometers, they still give all the spectrum in terms of centimeter inverse and never in terms of meter inverse, which is the SI unit. That means that lambda has to be expressed in centimeter. So these are the different quantities that we use in spectroscopy. Wavelength, its symbol is lambda and its unit is meter. Frequency has a nu, and second inverse or hertz. Speed is c, meter per second, and wave number is nu with a wavy cap over it, and this wavy cap means that it is in inverse, and this is meter inverse. But as I said, we generally continue using centimeter inverse, whether we are using a spectrophotometer to run a spectrum or doing any calculations, we always use the term meter inverse. So I'll briefly summarize what all we have done, and we have learned about the characteristics of a wave, which are direction, amplitude, wavelength, frequency, angular and linear velocity. In the classical picture, electromagnetic radiation is considered to be a transverse wave of mutually perpendicular electric and magnetic fields oscillating in the direction of the wave. And according to Maxwell's relations, the electric and magnetic fields recreate each other as the wave propagates until the electromagnetic wave meets an object. Maxwell's relations explained all interesting properties of light, such as diffraction as in rainbows and reflection as in mirrors, and established that light is a wave. The regions of electromagnetic radiation range from the low energy radio frequency up to the highest energy gamma rays, where nuclear transitions take place.